Good morning and happy Teach Me Tuesday. My name is Lisa Houston and I am a clinical nurse educator in the NICU. This week we are going to talk about total fluids and what that means and what calculations look like. I am going to attempt a live calculation. I'm going to record myself calculating this as I talk through it so you have a better example than just the static one that's on the slide. So bear with me. It's going to be my first time doing this, so we'll learn it together. But let's talk about why we have a total fluid goal. I think one of the most important things to understand is if we just think about what a term baby is doing. So a term baby comes out, they're doing great, they stay with their mom, they're nursing, they're doing all these things. They are not getting an abundant amount of fluids on that first day of life. And so that is what we need to think about when we're thinking about how that relates to premature babies or sick term babies, is that when they come out, they don't need 150 mils of fluid a day. Their body is supposed to get rid of excessive fluid, right? There's fluid in the alveoli that needs to get out. They need to pee it off. Their stomach when they're born is like the size of, I think they say an almond or a grape, about 5 mLs fit in there. So they're supposed to kind of go into a fluid deficit because of the fluid that's on their body. So the same is true for premature and sick term babies. We don't want to overwhelm their body with too much fluid right from the start. So that is why we start on slower fluids. We also cannot just give premature babies full feeds on the first day. We know from all of our experience, our NEC lecture, everything that we've talked about in the past, we cannot just feed them full volumes right from the start. So we're going to be giving them TPN, total parenteral nutrition, giving it through that central line or a PIV based on their age, their weight, their medical condition, ongoing clinical assessments, and also taking into account insensible water loss, medications that they're on. All that kind of factors into how we are going to give them their fluid. So the total fluid goal is the amount of fluid an infant needs to maintain hydration, grow, and safely stay in homeostasis. So that's, are your electrolytes stable? Are you growing? Did you pee out fluids? Did you lose weight? Remember, we want babies to lose weight at the beginning. That is a good sign. It is a sign that the alveoli released the fluid and the baby is able to pee it off. Babies that are not losing fluid in those first 4 to 7 days, we wonder why they are retaining their fluids. Are their kidneys working well? All that together. So this is a sample chart. I'm on my chart kick. I think June and July are like the month of charts. So it's just a quick summary. This is not exactly what everyone's doing. It's just kind of to help you get a picture of what's going on. We're going to start around 60 to 80 mils per kilo per day. We go up typically by 20 mils per kilo per day until we reach that total of 150 to 160. At bare minimum, an infant needs 120 mils per kilo per day for hydration. So I think that's an important one to think about. Let's write that down. We need, for hydration, 120 mils per kilo per day. And that's not saying you're going to grow. I'm doing the thing where I talk and can't write. Hydration. But you're going to stay hydrated. So keep that in mind as we continue on. So we talk about total fluids, but we also hear this phrase like total kcals. How much kcals does a baby need to grow? And that is really kind of the difference here. So total fluids is the amount of fluids they need to maintain hydration and support their bodily functions. We talk about total fluids in a mil per kilo per day. And kcals is the amount of calories a premature infant or a sick term infant needs to support growth, energy expenditure, and metabolic needs. For growth, an infant needs a minimum of 120 kcals per kilo per day in order to grow, to put on weight, to create new bone, for their lungs to grow. We need to get to 120 kcals per kilo per day. So on average, these are averages, right? We're not in a perfect system here, is what I like to talk about in the NICU. On average, about 150 mils is equal to 120 kcals. So 150 mils of fluid. So again, that's 150 mils per kilo is equal to about 120 kcals. If you're talking about that there's 20, kcals per ounce or something like that. When you're thinking about fluids and how we're giving them and the food that we typically feed our babies. So with total fluids, we think about a goal of about 150 to 160, and with total kcals, we think about a goal of about 120 kcals. So when we're thinking of those things, we're going to talk about when some of these factors influence if the baby's getting enough fluid or enough calories. So we're going to just look at a calculation I already did, and like I mentioned, we are going to do this one together. So if we just had a baby receiving complete parenteral nutrition, everything through IV, we're not talking about feeding them yet. Maybe they're going to be a surgical baby, maybe they're a premature baby who is on lots of dopamine or other pressors and we don't feel safe feeding them. Let's talk about how we would increase our total fluids. So if we just made this first one easy, which is easy math, 2 kilo PIV baby. On admission, we might start them at about 80 mils per kilo per day. Remember, we said averages between 60 and 80 for initial day. We'd say they're going to get 160 mils per day, but we don't just like run fluids, we do it per hour. So 160 mils per day divided by 24 hours means we're going to run the fluids at 6.7 mils an hour. If we increase by 20 mils per kilo per day, we're going to go up to 100 the next day, run it at 8.3. 120 is going to be 10. 140 is 11.7. 160 is 13.3 mils an hour. So by day of life 5, we've gotten them to that ultimate hydration place. Now, if we go back to what I said at the beginning and we think about that term healthy newborn with their mom nursing, it's similar to what the breast milk is doing, right? Initially, the moms are producing small amounts of colostrum. The milk starts coming in, usually by about day 5. The milk is in. Every woman is different, so let's remember that. The stomach has also grown from this little almond, and then it gets a little bit bigger to, a walnut and bigger until they can hold about 30 to 40 mils every 3 hours. So it is relational to what a term infant is receiving both in breast milk and what their stomach can handle. And so we're just trying to mimic that. We take the food away, but we want to mimic the fluid and the calories. So this is an example of what that would look like. So then we're like, okay, we want to get to full enteral feeds. We don't want to just give this baby parenteral fluids for the rest of their life. Remember, when you're talking about enteral fluid or enteral feeds, that's what's going in the GI tract, whether that's from an NG tube or PO feeding, whatever it might be. And parenteral is something that's coming from fluid, like an IV, a central line, a Broviac, whatever it might be, umbilical lines, etc. So we need to find a way to safely increase our feeds and safely increase our fluids at the same time. So most places these are just 3 basic examples of feeding plans. I'm sure your unit has a feeding plan. We have one on our unit. Our goal is to feed them within the first 24 hours. And then from there, we're trying to increase by about 20 mils per kilo per day of food as we wean our IV down. And we're going to go through an example and then we'll do our live example. If you remember from our neck lecture, and if you haven't watched that one yet, go back and watch it. We know from the evidence that one of the main things that we as a NICU team, a multidisciplinary team, can do for the prevention of neck is to have a feeding protocol. It's crazy. It's like you think it would be like, oh, don't feed them till day 7 or whatever. But the number one thing in all of the evidence tells us if you have a feeding protocol, your risk of neck decreases. So these are just some examples of feeding protocols that exist in NICUs. So let's look through an example. We start on total fluids. We only have parenteral nutrition and we want to change to enteral nutrition. So here we're going to have a 31 5/7 weeker who weighs 1.8 kilograms or 1,800 grams. They have a PIV. Another thing I wanted to point out is that your unit may be different in how they give their fluids. If you're using a PIV at 31 weeks, if you are using umbilical lines, if you're starting with starter TPN or D10, typically in the units I've worked at, 1,500 grams is kind of the cutoff and less than 31 weeks for those things. So if you're less than 1,500 grams or less than 31 weeks, you're getting umbilical lines, you're getting starter TPN, and if you're greater, you're getting a PIV, assuming we can get it in, and we're starting you on D10. Obviously, this is like a 90% of the time. One of my favorite things to teach, I just taught this in sim last week, is that the NICU is a land of gray. We do not have a ton of black and white, and so there's always going to be babies that fall outside of that, right? But typically, if you have kind of a guideline, that's what I'm talking about here, that's going to tell you. So again, we've got this little 31 5/7 weeker. We're going to start them on 80 mils per kilo per day. So we see that here. They need 160 mils for the whole day. We're going to divide that by 24 hours because we run our fluids as a per hour rate. So they're going to get their fluids at 6 mils an hour. the next day, we want to start feeds, right? We order breast milk, but we're going to give mom time to pump. She's really just getting drops of colostrum, which we are using maybe for oral immune therapy or, giving the small amounts that we have, but it's not really considered part of our nutrition yet. So we increase to 100 mils per day, which takes us up to 7.5. But we want to actually start some TPN, and we're going to start intralipids. So our TPN is going to run at 7, and our lipids are going to run at 0.5. Now the next day, we're going to go up to 120, right? But we have food now. So ironically, our fluid rate is going to stay the same. It's still going to be 7.5, but we're going to give food now. So we want to give 20 per kilo, which is going to be 20 times 1.8. You see that here. And typically, for these babies, we are feeding them every 3 hours. So they get 8 feedings a day. When you do this math, it actually comes out to 4.5 mils every 3 hours. But I don't know about you, but we don't feed on intervals with decimals. We don't feed 4.5. We feed at a whole number. So round it up to 5. So we're going to give this baby 5 mils every 3 hours, and we're going to keep our fluids running at the same. The next day, we're going to go up again to total fluids of 140, but mom's making great milk, baby's tolerating, so we're going to increase our food, right? So our food is just going to be our fluid increase here. You'll notice that our fluids are staying the same, and our food has gone up, and now we're at 9 every 3 hours. So the next day we get to 160. We're on day of life 5. We're on our total fluids of 160. 60 of that's going to be from food. 100 is going to be from fluid. The next day is day 7. Still at 160. We don't go up anymore. We have now made our goal, but now we've got 80 of food, and we're going to have 80 of fluids. So now we're finally starting to turn our fluids down, etc., etc. So let's do a live example. We're going to do this together. We're going to have math time, and I'm going to attempt to write without you completely blocking my face. Okay, so we're going to write this out. Here's our total fluids and food at the same time. So let's put some reminders at the top here. We have the reminder that our total fluid goal is going to be 160 mils per kilo per day. Our total kcal goal is 120 kcals per kilo per day, right? Those are our goals. We are going to go ahead and reuse our fun baby that we already did, our 32-weeker who weighs 2 kilos, because that's the easiest math that we can do. So let's work through this, okay? Remembering we are going to, in the units that I have worked in, typically we have PIVs running D10 at the beginning. So that's what we're going to start with, because this baby's 32 weeks and 2 kilos. We're greater than 31 weeks. We're greater than 1,500 grams. So you also were a rockstar nurse. You were the admit nurse. You threw that IV in on the first attempt. We don't need any umbilical lines. So day of life 1, which is considered admission day, we are going to have a total fluid goal of 80 per kilo per day. Now remember, that's 160 mils, but we don't run in that, and so we need to divide that by 24, and we're going to get a rate of 6.7. So we're going to have a PIV that's running D10W at 6.7 mils per hour. Beautiful, right? Everything's going great. Day of life 2 comes along. Oh, we don't need my little handprint here. So day of life 2, we're going to increase our total fluids to 100 mils per kilogram per day, right? Which is going to be 200 mils total. Now, in this situation, we are lucky because our mom is pumping and we want to start feeds, and she has milk, and so we are good to go and increasing this via her milk. So what we're actually going to do is divide our goal into 20 of food, so we'll write food here, and fluids, which is going to be 80. So our fluids aren't going to change, right? We are still going to run at 6.7 mils per hour. However, we are starting lipids because we all know how important fat is for our babies. So we're going to do that by dividing this into TPN. It's day of life 2. We're going to get off of our D10 and start TPN. So our TPN is going to run at 6, and our lipids are going to run at 0.7 because that's easy math. We're just going to do that easy. So as far as our food goes, we need to do 20 mils per kilo per day. So 20 times 2 is 40. So we need to give our baby 40 mils of food. But we all know that we don't just give them one feed of 40 mils and call it a day. We feed our babies typically every 3 hours. So we're going to divide that every 3 hours is 8 feeds a day. So we're going to divide 40 by 8, and we get 5. So we're going to give them 5 meals every 3 hours, and then we're going to run our IV at 6.7, 0.6 of your TPN and 0.7 of your lipids. So day of life 3, we are going to increase our total fluids, my handwriting is atrocious, to 120 mils per kilo per day. Again, we are going to increase our feeds because mom is doing great. So we're going to equal that out by turning our feeds up to 40 mils per kilo per day. And our food is going to stay at, our fluids is going to stay at 80 mils per kilo per day. Okay? So our total is still 120. So your IV is still running at 6.7. We'll just write that down here. And we've doubled our food. So if you did 40 times 2, right, 40 mils per kilo per day is 80. We do 8 feeds a day, so we divide 80 by 8 is 10 mils, right? So now we're at 10 mils every 3 hours. 10 mils, and we're still at 6.7. All right, let's continue on the next page. So, maybe. So day of life 3 was 120 mils per kilo per day. So day of life 4, it does not, here you go, day of life 4, turn your pen on, Lisa. We're increasing our total fluids to 140 mils per kilo per day. So we are going to increase our food. We were at 40, so now our food's going to go to 60, right? And our fluid remains at 80. It hasn't changed. So our fluid is still running at 6.7. Our feeds are going to go 60 times 2, which is 120, divided by 8 feeds a day, right? 120 divided by 8, if only I was so good at mental math, is 15. So we've made it to 15 mils every 3 hours. It's possible, right? We're getting close to being at half of our feeds that we would turn our lipids down at this point, but we're going to go one more day. So day of life 5, we increase to 160 mils per kilo per day. And what you can see here is when you do that and you're at 80 of food and you're at 80 of fluids, we may not need the lipids anymore. So this is still going to run at 6.7 mils an hour, but it's going to be 6.7 of TPN. And our food's going to go up. So day of life 6, we stay at 160. We made it. We hit our goal, 160 mils per kilo per day. So now when we go up in our food to 100, it is now time to decrease our fluids down to 60. So when we go down to 60 mils per kilo per day, our rate is going to decrease to 5 mils per hour. So we've actually just now started turning our IV down. Prior to this, the first 5 days of life, our IV has remained at the same. So day of life 7, we're at 160, but our food is now at 120, and our fluids are at 40. And day of life 8, 160, I've run out of room. And then day of life 9, 160 is going to be 160 of food, and our PIB is all done. Because down here we were at 20. And 140. So a couple things I want to point out here. If we were right here, right, we're on day of life 4, Our food's at 15 and our fluids are running at 6.7. And our PIV falls out, right? So our PIV goes bad. Do you think your provider is going to want you to replace it? Yes, right? Because we are not on enough food yet for hydration. We're only at 60. So the baby is not going to do well. Now, if we get down here, maybe we're on day of life 6, we're at 160. Maybe, depending on the baby, we might leave it out. Maybe on this baby, we could increase the feeds a little faster. But definitely by day of life 7, 8, 9, if your IV comes out, you could anticipate that the provider might say, you know what, we don't actually need this anymore because we're on enough food. So full feeds for this baby, right, is 160 mils per kilo per day, which equals 320 mils, which we divide by 8 feeds, so we get 40 mils Q3 hours. So it's important to keep that in mind. If we're trying to get to 40, right, here's our goal is 40, and we're only at 15, you can anticipate, hey, we probably can't keep our IV out. So that helps us kind of work through that. Additionally, when to turn your lipids off, when your lipids are going down, that's also going to kind of depend on how much food they're getting, what their food equals. Usually when we're at about 60 per kilo, maybe 80 per kilo, you have added in a fortifier, maybe to 22 cal. Maybe you've made your meds PO if you're on caffeine or any other medications. This is kind of that crucial point where we're trying to decide what to do next. The goal here was to talk through this together with my terrible handwriting and maybe my timing, and just to see kind of how we're increasing, why some of our decisions are being made regarding next steps. So I hope that was helpful. Now let's talk about what happens if your baby needs to be fluid restricted. So maybe you have a baby who has BPD, is a cardiac kid, is a cooling kid, and we want to get them to their total kcals of 120 per kilo per day, but we can't give them more fluid. We need to fluid restrict them. This is really true for kids with wide open PDAs that are on full feeds. We don't want to give them extra fluid to give them extra calories. So this is when you start seeing your concentrated feeds. Maybe we're giving them 24 cal. Maybe we need to get up to 27 cal, right? So for us here, we want to get even further. If they don't have any breast milk, we might combine 2 formulas. We might just give them straight 30 cal formula. Might be using MCT oil or olive oil or liquid protein, something to help boost their calories, right, without boosting their fluids. So they might be fluid restricted on 130, right? We said our goal is 150 to 160. But we may actually just be able to only give them 120, 130 mils per kilo per day, but we increase the density of the fluid so that instead of having 24 cals per ounce, we have 27 or 30 cals per ounce. We can still get them to their kcal goal. So that's what you're seeing when you're seeing these concentrated feeds. I encourage you to look at your orders or read your provider notes, and if it says, you know, total fluid goal of 130, you should be thinking to yourself, oh, we are fluid restricting, probably are going to be on higher calories. The main thing I think our parents always want to know is, why can't you just feed the baby? Why do we have to put these IVs in? Why do they need a central line? Why do they need a pick? And so explaining to them like, hey, we want to increase, we want to mimic what your breast milk would be doing, give them a small amount of fluids every day, increase over time. We're going to calculate that based on their weight, their health. That's their total fluid goal. But additionally, we don't want to just put all this food into their belly. We want to give them small amounts of food and gradually increase that over time. Just like your milk, you know, your milk was barely coming out and now you're getting more milk. This is how we're going to watch for feeding intolerance and reduce the risk of complications. Anytime we can explain to them the why behind why we're doing something instead of just saying, oh, we put an IV in your baby and we're not going to feed them today. That doesn't feel as good as saying like, these are your total fluid goals. This is what we need to do for your baby. This is why we're slowly increasing their feeds. You'll know your baby is ready for their IV to come out when we have gotten to a place where their food is more than their fluids. And that can help them understand. Once we see if your baby's tolerating, maybe we can increase your fluid a little bit faster so we can get some of these lines out. But for now, we're going to do it slowly. We're going to watch if they're spitting up, if they're having any swelling, if their stool is normal, and then we can decide what to do from there. So what we know is that our total fluids start around 60 to 80 mils per kilo per day. We are mimicking what the mom is making, what the baby's stomach size would be if they were a term baby. That's where we kind of get all these ideas. And then over time, obviously, there's a lot of evidence behind this. I was rereading a lot of fluid and nutrition evidence to kind of figure out how we do this. But really, this idea that the initial fluid management is going to be 60 to 80, then gradually increasing to 150 to 160. We're going to watch our weight, our urine, our electrolytes. We're going to advance our feeds with small frequent feedings to assess their tolerance. And then we're going to watch for when can we get these peripheral and central lines out. So hopefully this review of total fluids has been helpful. And if you have any questions, please reach out. And I will see you next week for another edition of Teach Me Tuesday.